Good morning and welcome to Thursday morning, May the 27th, I believe it is indeed. May the 27th. It's a Thursday morning, and again, John Stott is going to note the the things that were important to that church as it began, the church in Acts chapter 2 as it took shape. What were the things that the Holy Spirit impressed upon them as important? The things that they needed to be focusing on, the things they needed to be doing. And today, it's going to be worship. It's going to be worship. The suggested reading is actually Psalm 95, great worship psalm. And the picture, the snapshot there of the early church in Acts chapter 2 is verse 42. They devoted themselves to the breaking of bread and to prayer. We have seen that a living church is a learning and a caring church. It's also a worshiping church. The breaking of bread is evidently a reference to the Lord's Supper, though probably with a fellowship meal included. And prayer is more literally the prayers, alluding to prayer services or prayer meetings. What strikes me most about the worship of the early church is its balance in two respects. Firstly, their worship was both formal and informal, for it took place both in the temple and at their homes. We note that the first believers did not immediately abandon the institutional church. Doubtless, they were anxious to reform it according to the gospel, but they knew that its sacrifices had been fulfilled in the sacrifice of Christ. But they continued to attend the traditional prayer services that must have had a degree of formality. They also supplemented these with more informal home meetings and with their own distinctively Christian worship or Eucharist. We should not polarize between the structured and the unstructured, the liturgical and the spontaneous. The early church had both. So should we. Every congregation of any size should break itself into small groups. Secondly, the early church's worship was both joyful and reverent. There is no doubt about their joy. The Greek word in verse 46 denotes an exuberant outburst of joy. For the fruit of the Spirit is joy, and sometimes a more uninhibited joy than our ecclesiastical traditions encourage. When I attend some church services, I think I have come to a funeral by mistake. Everybody is dressed in black. Nobody smiles or talks. The hymns or songs are played at the pace of a snail or a tortoise, and the whole atmosphere is lugubrious. A word I've heard, but I could not define it for you right now. Burdensome, I would guess, is the just down. But Christianity is a joyful religion, and every meeting or service should be a celebration of joy. At the same time, the early church's worship was never irreverent. And yet today, if some church services are funeral, others are flippant. But if joy is a mark of authentic worship, so is reverence. Everyone was filled with awe in verse 43. The living God had visited Jerusalem, and they bowed down before him in that mixture of wonder and humility we call worship. I like that he calls both of those extremes out. The worship service that where songs are sung without feeling or meaning or heart, and then the worship services where it feels like those leading need to be making a joke, need to be, I don't know. I've been in both. And neither one is comfortable for me. Everything we do as far as worship goes needs to honor God. It needs to honor Him. It needs to be serious but joyful. And it needs to be joyful but yet humble and honoring. It's a balance to keep. And much of the Christian life is a balance between extremes. With God at the center, with the Holy Spirit's leading and guiding, we can worship God as He deserves, with smiles on our faces or with tears in our eyes, with hands clapping or hands staying still. It's the heart. It's the heart that makes worship to be true worship. Worship the Lord in the beauty of holiness. Blessings to you today.